ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਫੋਨ ਲਾਈਨ ਤੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਚਾਰਲੇਬੋਇਸ। ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਦ ਫੂਡ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ। Welcome on the show, Dr. Charlebois. Very good afternoon to you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Mr. Charlebois, I will ask you, the very first question I have for you is, on your social media, what you have been posting, you seem to not agree with the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh on his mission to question CEOs of big food chains. What are your thoughts on this? Why are you against him questioning these big CEOs?
Well, I'm not against him personally, but you have to keep in mind that our food inflation situation is part of a global phenomena. If you look around the world, Canada actually has one of the lowest food inflation rates in the world. Only Japan and the U.S. have a lower food inflation rate. So to basically look at one sector or one person and blame grocers for increased prices is a little bit too simplistic. It's a much more complicated situation, and also you want to keep in mind of the fact that really Canadians do spend a very small portion of their own budget on food compared to other nations around the world. So if you talk to processors, if you talk to ingredient companies across the supply chain, they're all experiencing higher costs. And that's why grocers have no other choice but to increase prices. And for grocers themselves, they do make money. But if you look at their balance sheets, it appears as though they are making actually more money selling non-food items than food items. Loblaw is a good example. Last quarter, food sales went up 8.4% year to year, when the actual food inflation rate was above 10%.
We do see the effect on the common man in BC, in Canada. For example, the price of meat has gone up 14%. The price of flour, which is used a lot in every household, is actually higher in Surrey, BC than in Kelowna. So we do see higher prices. We do see different prices in other cities. The question I have for you is, let's talk about the difference in prices that we see in every store in every city. Is there no set benchmark, or is there no government organization that controls or dictates prices for groceries in Canada?
Not really. I mean, we do have a free market in Canada. I don't think it would be wise to start regulating food prices. In fact, there are some products where prices are actually regulated at retail in Canada, and the best example is Quebec. In Quebec, they actually regulate milk prices at retail. And if you look at milk prices at retail in Quebec, milk is the most expensive. Milk in Quebec is the most expensive in the country. So regulating retail prices will actually impact the food industry. You may actually see prices go even higher as a result of regulating prices. I'm not entirely convinced that this is the best solution at this point, but I do recognize the fact that there are some companies that do have a lot of power. I would say that probably Loblaws, Walmart have a lot of power, and we haven't really protected independent grocers. And I know that in your area, in BC, there are many independent grocers that have struggled. And this is the one thing that I think the committee in Ottawa should be focusing on.
In the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned about how you feel that you cannot blame big supermarket chains for the rise in prices. We do see soaring profits that come in, and you may also mention it's not necessary that they come from groceries. They could come from other areas such as cosmetics and clothing and everything else. Why don't we get a transparent picture of which areas are they making profits in? Why is there a maybe this profit is coming from cosmetics, maybe it's coming from somewhere else? Why can't we get a transparent picture?
I think you raise a good point. And actually on Wednesday, a lot of discussion was around transparency. I actually think that the morality of selling food is completely different than selling lipstick or clothing. So I think your point is a good one in that I think Canadians deserve more transparency when it comes to food sales and profit specifically. Of course, you are looking at a very competitive market, so you have to really deal with this issue very delicately, and it goes back to the Competition Act and the Competition Bureau. I would say that it would be the Bureau's job to actually monitor what's actually happening right now, but they don't have the authority, so the Competition Act would need to be changed. And my guess is that it is actually going to change at some point, which is why grocers are playing nice, and they actually did show up in Ottawa this week.
Well, they showed up when they were summoned the second time. They did not show up the first time.
I was
yes.
In December. I testified myself before Parliament, and they were supposed to be there in December. And you're absolutely right; they had to be summoned in order to show up. But I actually think that they feel the heat. I mean, 80% of Canadians think that grocers are gouging consumers. So the politics are against them.
Definitely are. You mentioned the Competition Bureau and the Competition Act. Could you give us a little bit more detail? What role does that play?
So right now, you may recall the bread price fixing scheme that was going on for 14 years. That there is an investigation going on in Canada. It's been going on for 8 years. We haven't actually had any sort of report or conclusion to the investigation. Why? Because the Bureau has failed to get any specific data from what actually happened between 2001 and 2015 when the bride fixing scheme was actually going on. They have no authority. They have no power, no influence whatsoever. And so that's the one thing that Americans do have. Within months last year, the White House investigated into meat packing, only to realize that there was some collusion going on. And within weeks, GBS, one of the players, actually paid a hefty fine of $57 million. It would never happen in Canada. And also, I would actually add, when it comes to acquisitions, there's not a whole lot of oversight. In the U.S. right now, Kroger is trying to buy Albertsons, and Congress is all over that deal. In Canada, when Sobeys bought Safeway, when Loblaws bought Provigo down east, when Metro bought A&P, barely anyone raised an eyebrow. Nobody really cared. And now we have this oligopoly that is really influencing the marketplace.
Two more questions for you, Doctor, before I let you off on air. The first question is about grocery prices. I know we talked a little bit about it, but I'm just wondering if there's no organization, if there's no government entity that's controlling or monitoring or regulating prices, then do grocers get to decide their own price?
That's the system we have. Yeah, they set the price based on the market, basically. Grocers will set prices based on what they think the market can bear. That's the system we have in Canada, essentially. But I think the one thing that we need to address is competitiveness. Margins in Canada are double what they are in the U.S., which is indicative of how cozy things are right now for grocers. We need more competition. We need a company like Lidl or Aldi to come into the Canadian market. They're not coming into the Canadian market because Canada is not that attractive. We have interprovincial barriers. We have a very cumbersome fiscal regime. We have restrictive labor laws, labeling laws. I can go on and on and on. I mean, doing business in Canada is very difficult.
You know, when I had the opportunity to interview Mr. Singh yesterday, and I will play that interview after yours, he mentioned that his agenda is to get local farmers to produce more. His agenda is to give subsidies or grants to local farmers so we don't have to be so dependent on international supply chains. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's part of the solution, but Canada is the breadbasket of the world. I mean, we do play a role internationally, and world agriculture is a global market. Look at what happened with Ukraine last year. A lot of people thought, well, Ukraine is far away, it won't affect us, but it did affect us from a price perspective. So, I think it's important to recognize that not just one model should dominate, different models should dominate. And should we actually focus on small-scale farming? Absolutely, of course. But there are major businesses in Canada that are doing a great job feeding the world, and we shouldn't forget about that.
If we do have local business, do you think it will reduce the price of goods? The price of groceries will come down? You know, for example, I'm just confused because a lot of wheat is grown in Canada, but still we see the price of wheat doubling over time. The supply chain is very short. It's not an international supply chain. It's within the nation. It's within Canada. So what's the reason now behind increased prices?
Well, I would say there are a couple of macro factors here. Climate change has always been a factor. If you look at produce, for example, produce prices have gone up recently because of California. And of course, BC gets a lot of produce from California, especially this time of year. So you guys have been affected by that. Ukraine is still a factor. Right now, on March 18th, the UN grain deal will come to an end. And we're hoping for an extension, but there are no guarantees. If there is no extension, grains out of Ukraine won't leave, or grains won't leave out of Ukraine, and that can actually be problematic for prices. And the other factor that actually has made things more complicated for the entire food industry globally are supply chains. Supply chains are still not really working at the level that they were before the pandemic. It's going to take a while. I would say probably until the end of this year.
Even national supply chains, because we are not talking about international supply chains now. We're talking about Canadian supply chains. Goods made in Canada, manufactured, produced in Canada. I understand those supply chains might be affected too, but is the effect that drastic that the consumers are still paying the price for it?
Well, I mean, the global, the domestic retail food market in Canada is worth about $150 billion. We import for about $50 billion, but we export for well over $80 billion too. I mean, we're plus $30 billion. So we do business with the world. We buy, and what do we buy? Well, we buy mandarins, bananas, coffee, chocolate, things we can't grow here. I mean, we have an open economy in Canada, and we certainly need to keep that in mind. We're always going to continue to trade with the rest of the world. But out of Vancouver, for example, where you are, $18 billion worth of food comes into the Canadian market from abroad. And that really has been a challenge coming from Asia.
I see. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Charlebois. Really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your expert opinion. Thank you.
My pleasure. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.